Good morning, biology, and welcome to chapter 32, which is an introduction to animals. As you can see here, we've got a great example of an animal in the background here, this big old hippopotamus. But we're going to talk about what makes an animal, how we classify them, and then kind of get into some basics of development and how animals start from really, really small zygote up to the large creatures that they are. So the characteristics of an animal is something that is multicellular, something that's heterotrophic, and an organism that doesn't have cell walls. This picture here is all examples of animals. A lot of people don't think of insects as animals, or they won't think of things like sponges as animals, but they are indeed animals as well. We kind of break animals into two larger groups, whether they are vertebrates, meaning animals that have a backbone, or invertebrates, meaning they are animals without a backbone. 95% of animals alive today are invertebrates, meaning they lack a backbone. They are definitely the dominant life form on the planet. And then most of our animal species reproduce sexually and have the ability to move at some time in their life. Not all of them move all the time, but at some point they usually are able to move. Animals, like we said, are multicellular creatures, meaning their cells don't live alone. They're highly differentiated and specialized, and specialization is the adaptation of a cell for particular functions, just digestion, excretion, respiration, etc. And then when we take a whole bunch of these specialized cells and put them together, they make up tissues. And there are lots of different types of animal tissue: blood and muscle and connective tissue and fat tissue and cartilage, skin, bone tissue. These cells are connected by junctions called cell junctions. And there are different types of cell junctions, uh, but the important thing here is that these different types of tissues are held together, and have the same kind of function. Animals are heterotrophic. Remember that plants and other organisms that make their own food are what we call autotrophs. Animals are heterotrophs and must gain their complex organic molecules from other sources, either as this squirrel is eating this acorn there, or this hummingbird is getting that nectar. Both of those are from organic sources. They do this usually through ingestion, where they take in organic material inside of the body, and then digestion, where they use stomach acid and other tools to break down and extract the sugars, fats, amino acids, and proteins from ingested material. Like I said, most animals reproduce or have the capability to reproduce sexually. This happens when we have two gametes, usually egg and sperm, that fuse. They form this kind of structure here, the zygote, which is a diploid cell, meaning it has two copies of the chromosomes that forms from that gamete fusion. This will start to divide using mitosis, making a bunch of cells that are all identical, and then those cells will go through the process of differentiation. And differentiation is the specialization of cells to have different jobs. So in this picture here, we can have a base stem cell, and it can turn into any one of these cells on the outside here: a muscle cell, a fat cell, a bone cell. It has the genetics to turn into all of those cells, but certain genes will get turned on and certain genes will get turned off, so that it turns into whatever cell type is needed in that area. So once differentiation starts, it sets these cells on a path to what their adult job will be. Are they an immune cell? Are they a nervous cell? Are they a blood cell? Once they kind of start this differentiation, usually they continue until the end. So they don't start turning into blood cells and then all of a sudden change and go to muscle cells. They start as blood cells, they're usually going to end up as blood cells. We said that most animals move during some part of their life cycle. Sometimes it's very dramatic, like this flying fox here. But this movement is really the fusion of two types of tissues that are found in animals. And the two tissues are muscle tissue, which is specialized to contract and pull two things together, and nervous tissue, which contains cells called neurons to conduct electrical signals to muscles, usually from a brain or brain-like structure, which signals movement. Just, hey, I want to fly now. Hey, I want to walk now. Hey, I want to grab the doorknob now. Animals first likely arose in the ocean. probably started from structures like these guys here, these flagellated protists, that as they started to live in colonies, maybe got the ability here to differentiate. And as this differentiation happened, we started to get these very, very simple animals. The first kind of multicellular animal-like thing was probably a sponge. It probably looked something like this. These guys here. And then all other animals kind of expanded upon that, added limbs and gills and backbones and all those good things. A particular type of animal we will talk a lot about are chordates. And these are animals that have a notochord at one point in its development that usually becomes or is replaced by the backbone. In this picture here, the notochord is this number 5, this red kind of thing here. And the notochord is a flexible rod that is very firm, located in the dorsal part of the backbone. It usually becomes the backbone. But they will also have a couple other things in their development, and all chordates will have these. Are characteristic of them. They'll have a dorsal nerve cord, which is in the yellow here, pharyngeal pouch, which is this 2 here, and then a postanal tail, which is this 4 here. We'll talk a little bit more about that now. So the dorsal nerve cord, this yellow here, is a hollow tube of the notochord. Usually it will develop into a type of brain and spinal cord in our chordates. You got these pharyngeal pouches here. These are out pockets on the anterior end. So the front end, remember that terminology, of the digestive tract. We have a postanal tail here, which consists of muscle tissue and lies behind the opening of the digestive tract here. And it's important to note that these pharyngeal pouches in aquatic vertebrates have kind of become gills. They use them to breathe through. So kind of cool. When we talk about animals, we can describe them based on their body plan. And body plan is kind of an animal's shape, its symmetry, and the structure of its internal kind of organs. Symmetry is the body arrangement in which parts of the body lay on opposite sides of an axis are identical. In this giant Japanese salamander here, you can kind of cut him in the middle, and he's got half on one side, half on the other. He's got one leg on each side. He's got eyes on each side, teeth, and all of that. The body plan and the symmetry of an organism are determined, of course, by its genetics and kind of appear in its development. There are 3 types of symmetry. The first is asymmetrical, something that has no symmetry, so something like this sponge here doesn't have any symmetry. You can't cut him in half anywhere. You've got radial symmetry. This is a body plan with a top and a bottom, but no front, back, or right or left symmetry. Things like jellyfish and sea anemones, you can kind of cut them into any amount of chunks here because there is no front end or back end. And then bilateral animals are animals that can be split in half down one central plane. Things like humans, lizards, frogs, and snakes are all examples of this, and this dragonfly here. When we're talking about animals, sometimes it's useful to talk about directions that their bodies are located in or different parts of their body. So we have some terminology for this. The first is dorsal. This is the back end of an animal, and if you think of like a shark, it is that dorsal fin that pokes out of the water. Ventral is the opposite. It is the abdomen side of the body. So dorsal, thinking like back. Ventral, thinking front. Anterior means it is to the head end of the animal, and posterior means it is to the tail end of an animal. Most animals are in this kind of horizontal configuration, but in humans, our ventral is our belly side, our dorsal is our back side, anterior is towards the head, posterior is towards our non-existent tail. Having a bilateral body plan kind of leads towards this thing called cephalization. And cephalization is the concentration of all sensory and brain structures in the, or the majority of them, in the anterior or head end of an animal. So this cow here, he has ears and eyes and a nose that as he goes through, or she goes through this environment that she's in, she can see everything that's coming at her. And then she can make decisions based on that information that's coming to her brain, which is right in the front there too, and change how her body moves to adapt to whatever situation that she's in. So cephalization allows animals to see what's happening as they're moving into it instead of kind of being stuck at the back end trying to navigate, look over your body. It's not in the way if your head is in the front. We're going to talk a little bit more about germ layers later, but these are tissue layers in embryos that in all animals except sponges, we say that they're not tissue having because they only have one type. But embryos of cnidarians have 2 germ layers, and then all other animals have 3 germ layers. So humans have 3 germ layers, worms have 3 germ layers, everything else has 3 germ layers. Having more germ layers usually means that as an organism you can be more complex, because all of these will eventually turn into different organs and structures. You can kind of see this here on this image. Don't get lost in the sauce. We're going to talk about this more later, but I just wanted to kind of show you the different, where these different tissues kind of turn into. The last thing in 32.1 is body cavities. Most animals have some type of body cavity. It is this space here labeled as coelom. And this one, we'll talk about coeloms more later, but it is a body cavity that is a fluid-filled space that forms between the digestive tract, the yellow here, and the outer body wall, the blue. Some animals, like flatworms, lack body cavities and are solid throughout their entire body, and others have very large, pronounced body cavities. The kind of purpose for body cavities is they can act as a reservoir for nutrients, for waste. Some animals, that's where their blood is. But it also allows for movement of internal organs and allows for this worm here can squish and squeeze and all kinds of things. It has this extra space that this muscle tissue around it can kind of fill and squeeze and squish into.